Testing. Hello in the tap room, everybody.
Hey, Steve.
Hello. My name is Steve Himmel. I'm one of the co-founders here of Henderson Brewery. And as is the case in the middle of Friday of every month, you're here for the release of the Ides of January 2018. I always like to tell the story of why we make these Ides beers. So, of course, being in the beer business is one of the most fun things in the world. And to make it even more enjoyable, we decided when we started the brewery that each month we would challenge ourselves with creating a beer from scratch. And we take as our inspiration for all of the Ides beers different stories about the history of Toronto. We take these stories, we give them to our brewer, and that is the inspiration for the beer that we make that month. It's a really fun pursuit for us because we never really know what the beer is going to taste like, and it's a great opportunity for the brewers to stretch their wings and make something interesting. And Jeff Kaldma, who came up with the recipe for this beer, is going to take a minute to tell you about it before we introduce a special guest to bring a little more context to the story. Now, I'll give you the short strokes on the story. When we opened the brewery, Aiden, my partner's father, brought in this piece of memorabilia for us to hang in the brewery. I'm pointing at this Toronto Toro's, it's not called a banner, is it?
Pennant.
A pennant, thank you. Pennant. And a lot of the younger kids here at the brewery didn't really know the story of the Toronto Toros, which is emblematic of the problem that we have in our great city. Too many of our stories stay buried. Too many of our stories don't get told. And the story of the Toronto Toros and the WHA's short run in Toronto is a really great one. I'll just give you some short strokes. It's the early 70s. The NHL is booming, and the decision is made to start a rival league called the WHA. And there's a handful of teams in that league, including teams in Winnipeg and in Edmonton and in Ottawa that didn't have teams. And the nice thing about the league was that it really helped to bring up the status of the players who were playing in the NHL at the time. It gave them a competitive workplace, it raised their salaries, and it made a competitive environment that forced the NHL to become a better league. But not everybody loved the WHA, and in a way it was it got a bit of short shrift, particularly in Toronto. Harold Ballard, who owned Maple Leaf Gardens, didn't treat the team very well. And in fact, he turned the lights off for their first game and charged them $3,500 to turn the lights on. He made them build their own dressing room and wouldn't let them share it with the Leafs. And from what I hear, he made a lot of other trouble for the Toros. What we tried to make is the perfect beer to drink while you're watching a hockey game, and I think we've achieved that in our Toro Pilsner. Now, when we started the Ides series, we had the hopes that for every launch we would have the opportunity to get a special guest. And we have had some special guests come in and talk about the beer from their perspective, tell us a little more about the story. But I must say, we have never been so lucky as to have such a person as we do here tonight. You won't believe me when I tell you who's standing right here, but playing for the Toronto Toros, this gentleman, Hockey Hall of Famer, ranked as one of the top 100 hockey players in history, 6 Stanley Cup rings. Ladies and gentlemen, a nice hand for Frank Mahovlich. I'm hoping you can just tell us a little bit about the WHA, the Toros, and your experience, if you don't mind.
Well, it was quite an experience, you know. I had 18 and a half years in the NHL, and I was with the great Montreal Canadiens, and my career was coming close to an end, and I thought, why not give it a new experience? So I got a notice, or a phone call from John Bassett, and he was interested, and we made a deal that the NHL couldn't match. So I came over to the Toronto Toros, and as soon as I signed up, the WHA decided to play the Russians. So I had to go back to Moscow in 1974, again for another round, a series of playing the Russians. And it was quite exciting. And this time I had Bobby Hull and Gordie Howe playing with me, so going with them was a real nice experience. And I recall one of the nicer things that happened, our training camp, we were out west, and Gordy and his family were in Saskatoon, where Gordy came from. And when we were in Saskatoon, I get a phone call from Gordy saying he'd like to have me join his father and his 2 sons for dinner. And I thought that was one of the greatest thrills of my life, was being invited to that dinner in Saskatoon because of the WHA. Well, anyways, there was a number of experiences that I've had. And you wouldn't believe this, but I used to work in a brewery up in Timmins, Ontario. Can you believe this? My dad wanted me to put on a little muscle, so he had a job for me one summer working at the Dorrans Brewery in Timmins, Ontario. And that is the last time I tasted any beer that was as good as this. It was fresh. It was so similar to that great beer I had, and before they pasteurized it, we used to drink it for lunch at Dorrans Brewery, and it was quite a thrill there. That was another exciting time. And of course, Paul Henderson was my teammate, and this is a Henderson beer, right? So he was a teammate of mine with the Toros, and we went. We also had a training camp one year in Modo in Sweden. Jönköping was the name of the town, and I think 3 or 4 great hockey players from Sweden came from this little town where we had training camp. And that was quite an experience too. We had some great times, and of course the Toros didn't do that well. We never won any championships, but we did have a lot of fun. And so here's to a great beer and a great time and a great WHA at one time.
Cheers! Cheers!